On August 6th and 9th, 1945, two suns appeared over Japan.
It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The force from which the sun draws his power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East.
They were not lights that gave life. They were symbols of destruction. Over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two atomic bombs fell, marking the end of World War II.
We are now prepared to destroy every productive enterprise the Japanese have in any city.
The exact number of victims will never be known. Thousands simply vanished without a trace. Estimates range from 150,000 to 250,000 people killed instantly. What we will show now is how these events unfolded. Who was on the plane and who was on the ground when everything exploded. It was the first and only nuclear attack in history, and today we will focus on the horror. Hello everyone, this is Top Curiosities. If you watch the movie Oppenheimer, you may have noticed that it doesn't fully reveal the real consequences of creating the bomb. Oppenheimer himself had dark visions, but the actual impact of the nuclear weapon is not shown. Did Nolan choose not to show the bombing? Or was it a creative choice? Even 80 years later, the fear remains. The fear that something like this could happen again. It is crucial to understand the hell that occurred so that it never happens again. Everything we share is accurately documented. Some scenes are imagined, but the central facts are real. Two cities were destroyed by nuclear weapons that had only a fraction of the power of today's arsenals. We must never forget this. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel. This is a growing channel, and your support is important. Here, we tell real stories that have left a mark on generations or are little known. And you can suggest new video topics. Let's set the scene. In 1945, World War II was nearing its end. Italy and Germany had already fallen, and Japan was resisting, refusing to surrender. This was part of Japanese culture, deeply rooted. The Japanese homeland remained intact. No enemy soldier had set foot there. Japan had lost conquered territories, but the motherland remained free. The United States had military superiority in the Pacific, a leverage that increased when troops in Europe were freed. American victory seemed assured, but the big question was, at what cost? It was in this context that the United States planned the so-called Operation Downfall, which involved a massive landing on the Japanese islands. But it would have been an extremely risky attack. Historically, any invader trying to enter Japan faced geographic obstacles and fierce resistance from the Japanese people, who would fight to the last man to defend their culture, customs, and families. Military calculations indicated that the Japanese army had over 2 million soldiers and could still train 28 million civilians. Conquering Japan would have been a long mission, with enormous casualties on both sides. Estimates suggested the United States would lose about 4 million soldiers, and Japan almost 10 million people. Faced with these numbers, the brutal alternative was to use nuclear weapons. From this point, we follow two destinies. One is Colonel Paul Tibbets of the United States Air Force, commander of the mission that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. The other is Sadao Hiran, who was 12 years old when Hiroshima was destroyed and became one of the survivors of the nuclear attack. Sadao was born in 1932, during a period of peace. He was the second child in his family and lived in the suburbs of Hiroshima, then an industrial city with a military tradition. His childhood was happy. He played on the beach, collecting shells, crabs, and fish. Meanwhile, Tibbets was finishing medical school in Florida, specializing in abdominal surgery. But he realized his dream was to fly and enlisted in the Air Force in 1938. When his training period ended in 1941, Japan attacked the American base at Pearl Harbor, and the United States officially entered World War II.
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Tibbets became a captain and remained in the Air Force. While he carried out his first combat flights, Sadao saw his childhood end, helping his family survive during the war. Over time, Tibbets was called back to the U.S. to specialize in flying B-29 bombers. Sadao faced increasingly difficult circumstances, but held hope for Japan and believed the empire would win. In late 1943, Tibbets received the summons that would change his life, to become the guardian of the atomic bomb. At that moment, he had no idea of the real impact of the mission. He recalls being called by a high-ranking general to come to his office. As soon as he entered, the general made sure the door was securely locked. He sat at the desk, looked around to make sure no one else was there, and calmly said that Paul Tibbets could be considered one of the guardians of the atomic bomb. At that moment, Paul Tibbets had no idea what his superior was talking about. He didn't grasp the historical weight of that conversation. He knew what an atom was, but he couldn't imagine what an atomic bomb would be. The only thought that crossed his mind was to finish the meeting quickly and go eat in the mess hall. He found the whole thing tedious. It's important to remember that, on that day, the atomic bomb didn't even exist. The famous Oppenheimer test had not yet taken place. Scientists were making progress in their research, but the weapon would still take nearly 2 more years to be completed. Even so, by that moment, the Army had already chosen who would bear such a tremendous responsibility. From that point on, there was no turning back. Paul Tibbets' life changed forever. He was forced to lie to all his friends and family about what he knew. The most common question he heard was something trivial. "So, what are you working on?" But he had to invent stories, and worse, remember every detail he had made up to avoid contradicting himself. After all, no one could suspect that he had been selected for a mission of absolute secrecy. For Paul, it was almost an entire year of waiting, without fully understanding what was about to happen, and without imagining the enormous impact it would have on his life. In December 1944, Tibbets and other aviators were assigned to the 509th Squadron, preparing for the nuclear bombing of Japan. In 1945, young Sadao Hirano was still in school, but he barely studied. Japan was already in a downward spiral of defeats, and the labor shortage meant that students of all ages were called upon to help with the war effort. Like his classmates, Sadao did a bit of everything. He worked in the fields, helped demolish houses, and assisted with various government-assigned tasks. The Japanese strategy was simple but harsh. Tear down rows of houses and buildings to prevent fires from spreading during air raids. There was Sadao, alongside his friends, wielding hammers, pickaxes, and axes, reducing homes that once belonged to their neighbors to rubble, all in the name of defending Hiroshima. He believed that this effort could prevent a greater tragedy. And he wasn't alone. Everyone around shared the same hope. American bombings were becoming increasingly frequent, and everyone prepared for what they believed was just another air raid. People thought the enemy's ultimate goal was to pave the way for a ground invasion. Hiroshima even had anti-aircraft defenses, but the new U.S. bombers flew at much higher altitudes, making these weapons almost useless. Curiously, the city had been attacked less than other regions of Japan. This sparked speculation in the streets. Why was Hiroshima being spared? Some said the Americans intended to use the city as a military base after occupation. Others believed that relatives of Japanese immigrants living in Hawaii or California had pleaded with the U.S. government for mercy. In the end, they were just rumors. Despite this, the atmosphere was one of constant fear. Everyone lived on edge, never knowing when the next attack would occur. Imagine having to tear down entire houses without warning, just to prepare for a bombing that could happen at any moment. But Hiroshima would not be hit by just another attack. A single bomb, an unimaginable weapon, would be enough to change Sadao's life and the lives of his entire family forever. On July 26, 1945, everything was ready. The bomb had been secretly tested days before. President Truman offered Japan unconditional peace in exchange for immediate surrender. If the Japanese refused, they would suffer consequences, as the president warned.
That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
In response, Japan refused, determined to fight to the very end. In Hiroshima, Sadao listened to the shrill sound of sirens warning of new air raids and ran for cover. American planes dropped some bombs, but they also scattered leaflets. He knew exactly what was written on those papers. Messages in Japanese urging the population to leave the city to escape something far worse. Yet Sadao also knew that collecting those leaflets was forbidden. It was considered treason, an act against the homeland, an affront to Japan's honor. Authorities had ordered that anyone caught with one of these enemy leaflets be arrested immediately. So he watched the papers float through the air, like a strange white rain descending over Hiroshima, but didn't dare touch a single one. To him, it was nothing more than lies, enemy manipulation. Emperor Hirohito had already declared over the radio, Japan would never surrender. Meanwhile, Paul lived in constant anxiety. The orders he had received were clear. He could not take off and had to remain at the base. Day after day, he watched bombers take to the skies. Almost every morning, planes departed on new missions, but he wasn't on any of them. Those flights were just rehearsals. More than 50 overflights were carried out over the skies of Japan, carrying dummy bombs, or in some cases, conventional explosives. The intent was simple: to accustom Japanese defenses to that pattern of attacks, to precisely map routes to the targets, and to record detailed imagery for the operations planners. But Paul Tibbets wasn't allowed to board. If, by chance, one of those planes were shot down, they couldn't risk him falling into enemy hands and revealing crucial information under interrogation. So he remained on the ground, powerless. He watched his colleagues doing exactly what he most wanted: flying, fighting, participating. While others fulfilled their duty in the skies, Paul stayed grounded, torn between the duty of secrecy and the frustration of not being able to fight. The shipment arrived on July 30th, 1945. It was a 4-ton bomb, with a design that, at first glance, didn't look much different from other bombs dropped on enemy territory up to that point. So modest in appearance that it earned the nickname Little Boy. Paul may have underestimated the device. After all, why all the fuss over a single bomb? Why send a B-29 carrying just one artifact? He didn't know. But inside the capsule were 64 kilograms of uranium-235. To him and his team, it seemed just another mission, like so many others. And finally, he would be allowed to pilot. Along with Little Boy came physicist Commander Francis Birch and physicist Harold Agnew. A dilemma soon arose. Agnew considered the bomb extremely dangerous to transport armed. A takeoff accident could detonate it immediately. According to him, it wasn't safe to fly with the weapon fully armed. It had to be disarmed in some way. On the other hand, could the flight crew arm it during the journey? Birch solved the dilemma. He removed a piece from the bomb, a part that would only be reinstalled just before release. This made the most dangerous weapon ever created transportable. In the early hours of August 6th, the moment had finally arrived. The weather forecast was perfect. Clear skies, light winds, ideal flying conditions. Colonel Paul was fully awake, ready to carry out his mission. He walked toward his B-29 bomber, which carried a special name, Enola Gay. It was the same name as his mother, Enola Gates Tibbets. A piece of maternal memory carried to a distant land. Perhaps as he approached the plane, Paul offered a slight smile. Maybe he remembered the smell of the apple pie his mother used to bake, the warmth of a childhood hug, or even her surprised expression when he left medicine to enlist in the Air Force. At that moment, Mrs. Enola Gay wasn't physically present, but in a way, she accompanied her son in spirit, engraved in the very name of the plane that would take him on the most important and devastating mission of his life. 15 minutes before 3 a.m., the Enola Gay took off from Tinian Air Base in the Mariana Islands over the Pacific Ocean. Alongside Colonel Paul Tibbets, 2 more B-29s took off for observation and support, and 4 more aircraft participated in the mission for reconnaissance and analysis of the explosion's effects. Only the Enola Gay carried the nuclear bomb. The other planes were support flights. The 6-hour journey passed without incident. Meanwhile, Sadao Hirano slept peacefully, unaware of what was about to happen. In the Enola Gay cockpit, the scientific team prepared. Physicists Francis Birch and Harold Agnew reviewed the final safety procedures. Agnew warned that the bomb was extremely unstable and that any accident could detonate it during takeoff. To resolve the situation, Birch had removed a critical component, which would only be replaced at the moment of release, ensuring the most powerful weapon ever created could be transported safely. As the early morning progressed, Colonel Paul Tibbets stayed alert and focused, silently remembering his mother, Enola Gay, a thought that had inspired the plane's name. Perhaps he recalled moments from his childhood, his mother's apple pie, her comforting hug, and the decision to leave medicine to pursue aviation. At 8:09 a.m., the Enola Gay reached nearly 10,000 meters above Hiroshima. The plane remained undetectable, with no radar or ground observation picking it up. In the final minutes of approach, Paul Tibbets began the run to the release point. Just 6 crucial minutes. At 8:15 a.m., the little boy bomb was released. It took 44 seconds to reach detonation, and in that brief instant, tens of thousands of lives were abruptly ended. Immediately, the Enola Gay executed an evasive turn, moving as far away from the blast zone as possible. Meanwhile, Sadao Hirano and his classmates were in the schoolyard, gathering to begin their daily activities. Suddenly, an arrow of orange light, brighter than the sun itself, illuminated everything. There were no shadows. Everyone was struck by the glare, even with protective glasses on. Inside the plane, only 3 crew members knew the true nature of the mission. For the rest of the team, it was just another conventional bombing run. Even so, the intensity of the event left them stunned. Paul Tibbets recalled someone on board exclaiming, "Oh my God." He himself described that moment as frightening, unimaginable, and hard to believe. Inside the plane, only 3 crew members knew the true nature of the mission. All the other official cameras, installed on the other aircraft to record the historic moment, failed. They were rendered useless by the intensity of the explosion. Only one recording survived that day. A film captured by a smuggled camera used discreetly on board one of the planes. The explosion released only 1.4% of little boy's radioactive material, a tiny fraction, but enough to generate a blast equivalent to 15,000 tons of dynamite, produce heat of 4,000 degrees Celsius within a 5-kilometer radius, create a shockwave that devastated everything and everyone nearby. Sadao fainted from the impact. When he woke, he felt extreme thirst, difficulty breathing, and air thick with ash. He heard screams, children calling for their mothers, people suffering severe burns. The scene was total destruction. Torn clothing, exposed skin, deep burns. Meanwhile, the Enola Gay crew began the return flight, sharing sandwiches, unaware of the scale of the disaster they had just caused. Sadao and 2 friends ran to a nearby hill, and what they saw was an absolute nightmare. 2/3 of the city reduced to rubble, streets and avenues unrecognizable, people trapped under debris or burned, screaming for help, small fires merging into a firestorm that consumed everything. All the efforts to contain the fires and create fire breaks proved useless. People buried in debris were engulfed by flames. Many who tried to cross rivers drowned. On the day of the explosion, between 50,000 and 100,000 people died within the first hours. Tens of thousands more would succumb in the following days, weeks, and months, victims of injuries and radiation. Paul Tibbets landed the Enola Gay at the base and was greeted by hundreds of people and high-ranking officers. Upon stepping off the plane, he received a Medal of Honor, symbolizing the historic milestone of the mission. Meanwhile, Sadao and his friends began the long journey back home. He still remembers the shocking scene. A man with a wooden pole pierced through his abdomen. Soldiers tried in every way to remove it, but they couldn't. They had no strength left. The skin on their arms hung in strips. The only way to walk was with their heads down and arms extended forward. He described that sight as ghostly figures wandering through hell. Along the way, they found 3 buckets of water. That was what gave them the energy to continue. Sadao Hirano only made it home by 6 in the evening, almost 12 hours after leaving that morning. His parents were alive. They lived in the suburbs, and it was his mother who noticed something strange. The fingers on his hands were clenched, as if holding something. With effort, Sadao opened them one by one. What he held was a mass of skin, his own skin, still attached to his arm. His mother had to use scissors to cut away the remaining pieces. She then cleaned his wounds with sake alcohol, gave him a dose of the drink, and he fainted. Sadao Hirano remained bedridden for 20 days, immersed in pain. Meanwhile, the Enola Gay flew again. This time, Paul Tibbets was not in command, and the plane carried no nuclear bomb. It was simply part of the escort for another bomber carrying the second atomic weapon. The destination was now another city, Nagasaki. On August 9th, just 3 days after Hiroshima, the United States dropped the second and final nuclear bomb on a military target. In Nagasaki, more than 70,000 people lost their lives. By the time Sadao Hirano finally got out of bed, Japan had already surrendered. World War II was over, but the scars of the explosion remained on Sadao's body for the rest of his life. And the scars of the atomic bomb stayed in the memory of an entire generation, marking Hiroshima and Nagasaki as symbols of the devastating power of a new kind of war. Fortunately, such a conflict has never happened again, but every time we hear about the risk of nuclear war, this horror comes to mind, and today, with far more powerful weapons, the destructive potential is unimaginable. A modern nuclear attack would leave hardly any survivors. Every story is unique, and this is one that must never be repeated for the good of all humanity. If you enjoyed this narrative, subscribe to the channel and leave your comment below. Tell us what you'd like to see in future videos. It's very important to have you with us on this project, sharing real, detailed, and often unknown stories. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being here. See you in the next video.